So Happy New Year, everybody. So we can go around and we can do a roll call, I guess, which, let's see, Michael's not here. Oh, you saw, yes, you want to go ahead, Diane?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see. So Trustee Ansari? Trustee Ansari?
Good evening.
Trustee Borninski?
Good evening.
Trustee Foster?
Good evening.
Trustee Ganguly? Is she here?
No.
No, okay. Supervisor Graham Hudak?
Good evening.
Clerk Segrist? Is not here. Slavens, good evening. We have Commission Cruz? No? Foster?
Still here.
Lee?
Here.
Mallet?
Good evening.
Singh? Walther?
Here.
Watkins? Or Watkins, sorry.
He's not here.
Okay. Weber
Here.
and Zuber.
Here.
All right.
Very good, thank you. Welcome and Happy New Year, everybody. And this is exciting times. Found out just last year that Wayne County was going to try to put or they're going to put a millage on the ballot for transit. At the meantime, Aaron's team was working fast, Aaron and Patrick, to work with different communities and come up with different solutions for this. And so this is our study session to discuss kind of the things that you worked out and who you worked with. If you wouldn't mind, Aaron, just kind of giving an overview and talking about who you worked with, the different communities. So it's all for you. Thanks, Aaron.
Yes. Hi, everybody. So we'll do an introduction. Do you want to do that now, or do you want to do that after the summary? Okay. All right. I'll give a little summary, and then we can introduce ourselves for our OHM consultant, who doesn't know everybody. But thank you all for coming. This is the first joint meeting of the Planning Commission Township Board to discuss public transit. As Supervisor noted, there was a change in state legislature last year, and communities are no longer allowed to opt out of public transit. So in light of that, and in response to a lot of the public engagement that we heard during our master plan, where people were saying they wanted public transit, we started talking administratively about how we can integrate, how we can connect to the smart network, how we can better support Nankin Transit, how we could connect to the ride in Ann Arbor, and how all these pieces can work together cohesively and efficiently for our residents. At the same time, Wayne County is going to be proposing a millage that's going to go to the voters this year, August of 2026, and it is a county-wide measure. So whereas before, like I said, communities were allowed to opt in or opt out of the smart network, this is county-wide. So we wanted to make sure that we were prepared for this. The same thing happened in Oakland County in 2022, where Oakland County did a county-wide millage vote. And surprisingly to county officials, it passed. They didn't think it would, and it did, and they didn't have a plan. They didn't have anything in place. So, you know, the millage goes into effect. Residents are wanting their smart connections. They want their ride share. They want to be able to call and make a reservation, and they're going to the local government saying, where's our smart connection? And they didn't have a plan. So we wanted to make sure that if this passed, the millage passed for Wayne County, that we had something in place. Not only that, we're planning for the future for our residents who said they wanted this as part of the master plan project. So recognizing that public transit does not stop at municipal boundaries, county boundaries, we really wanted to take a comprehensive look at public transit and how we can integrate not only with the existing network going east towards Westland, but also going north, going south to the communities and to the municipalities that have been historically opted out. So we have contacted a number of communities in the area. You'll see by this little nifty handout. We are one of now 7 communities. So we have project partners that are all part of the opt-out red area on this map. So looking at doing a Western Wayne County public transit strategy that will look at each of these communities and how they can connect to the network, how they can get around each other, and how we can work with each other. So we have contracted with OHM Advisors Adriana Jordan from OHM is here. She has a wonderful and thorough presentation to talk about the project itself, what the existing conditions are, what we've heard from our public engagement, and that goes beyond just what we've heard from Canton, but also through our partners, and discussing next steps on the project. This is not a final plan that she's presenting. This is just the kind of the first step, giving an update to each member of the consortium. She or one of her partners at OHM will be going to each of the consortium communities throughout January, February, maybe even March, to give the similar presentation on the update and get some feedback from either the Board of Trustees, City Council, City Commission, Planning Commission, as requested. So with that, we can go around and just kind of introduce and say which board we're with, if you want to start here.
Karen Walther, Planning Commissioner.
Doug Weber, Planning Commission.
Don Zuber, Planning Commissioner.
Summer Foster, Planning Commissioner and Township Trustee.
Joe Hauver, Deputy Supervisor.
Diane Slavens, Treasurer.
Anne Marie Graham, Hughes, Canton Township Supervisor.
Michael Segrist, Clerk.
Kate Borninski, a Township Trustee.
Amara Ansari, Township Trustee.
Clarence Lee Jr. on the Planning Commission and Zoning Board.
Jeff Mallard, Planning Commission.
Aaron Schluto, Senior Planner.
Adriana Jordan, Project Manager for OHM Advisors on this endeavor. And thank you very much for having me here to speak with you tonight. I really appreciate the opportunity to get your feedback. And thank you for the second mic.
Maybe Patrick, too.
Oh, sure. I'm Patrick Sloan, Community Planning Manager.
Who's that guy in the room?
Is that guy back there?
Should I go ahead and get started on the presentation then? Please. Okay. So very briefly, because there's a lot of content to get through tonight, I'll just give a very high-level overview of what we're going to discuss. We will recap the regional context, although I think Aaron already gave a wonderful recap of how we've gotten here today. We'll talk a little bit about where we are in the timeline for the project. We will talk about the existing conditions review and development of the base map that we've done, recap the engagement process that's been ongoing, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion about some of the mobility strategies, the high-level mobility strategies brainstormed by the Transportation Steering Committee at our last meeting. And then we'll move on to talking about next steps. And then we'll open it back up for discussion. But I do want to emphasize that we tried to create an informal environment tonight so that if you do have questions as I'm moving through the slides, please feel free, raise your hand to engage as we're going through the discussion. And you don't have to wait until the end to hold your questions. This is really meant to be very interactive this evening. So the meeting goals for tonight, again, are to recap that regional context. Aaron already talked about the different communities that are involved in the consortium, but I'll just mention there's City of Plymouth, Plymouth Township, City of Northville, Northville Township, obviously Canton Township, Van Buren Township, and then also City of Westland. And I do want to point out that the City of Westland is rather unique in that it already opts in to Smart Service. So it is the only portion of the consortium that is opt-in already. All the other consortium members are currently opt-out. And then we'll move on again to discussing those existing conditions, debrief on the community engagement, and then hoping to get your feedback on what you would like to see for mobility strategies as we're developing this plan. So PA 236 was enacted. It sounds weird to say last year. because now we're in 2026, but it amended the Public Transportation Authority Act to essentially eliminate the opt-out provision. It also removed the previous 5-year limit on tax levies for SMART, which is actually now very relevant in terms of this 2026 millage, because as they are looking at doing this countywide vote in August, they are now looking at doing it for a 10-year millage, which they previously, could not have done until PA 236 was enacted. And Oakland County, the millage that they passed was also a 10-year millage. I think this is a really good thing because it does allow for a longer period of planning and implementation on the part of SMART to actually get the service in place before voters are then asked to re-vote on it in the future. And from what we're hearing, and this is all very new and recent information, it sounds like it's going to be a renewal of the existing millage, which for current opt-in communities is 0.994 mils, and then just expanding that renewal county-wide. Just for comparison, the Oakland County millage is 0.95 mils, so it's very similar, just a smidgen less than the 0.994. So if there's any questions about that, please let me know. Otherwise, I can move on to the next slide. So we have been meeting and coordinating with SMART. SMART is working on its own plan and strategy for Western Wayne County, although it does not get as in-depth into the planning that Canton and its consortium member plans are getting into. SMART did hold its stakeholder coordination meeting initially on October 8th, and at that meeting, it was primarily just to go over existing conditions review that they had done. And then we held, or rather Canton Township requested that SMART hold a follow-up meeting with them on November 7th. And OHM attended that meeting just to find out more information about the timeline for when they were going to be coming out with their planning effort for the Canton area and some of the other communities. And then on December 17th, there was a second stakeholder coordination meeting, again with Canton, Westland, and Livonia. And at that coordination meeting, and I have some slides to show from that meeting, SMART just talked about where it was in the process of planning for an expansion into Western Wayne County, and there's not a lot of on that right now, and you'll see the level of detail that they provided to us in a minute. They are supposed to be coming out with a more detailed plan. I've heard the third week of January, which would be next week. I don't know if that will absolutely happen or not. It's kind of unfortunate with the timing of this meeting that if it does come out next week, we don't have that information here tonight. But as soon as we have that information, I'm sure Erin will share it out to the Board of Trustees and the Planning Commission. So these are some of the slides that they showed us at that December meeting. They did do a kind of community transit exchange survey, and I do want to emphasize that to our understanding, SMART has not put this survey out to the general public. It was more or less put out to more specific focus groups that may be more inclined to use transit in the first place in terms of the services that SMART is currently providing. So it looks very different, in my opinion, from the results of the public transit survey that Canton ran, where there were 935 responses. And again, we don't exactly know who SMART targeted on this survey, but we do know it most likely wasn't the general public, just based off of what we've heard. So they asked, are there unmet transportation needs in the community? And the responses that they received were that there are unmet needs around weekend service times, collaboration between service providers, and then transportation to basic necessities like work, groceries, medical appointments. And then they heard as well that there was a desire for more curb-to-curb or door-to-door service. And they were also asked, what types of services do you think would work best in your community? And the respondents actually ranked demand response and microtransit at 37%, which is higher than what we saw in the Canton public transit survey that was done with the 935 responses. And then that was followed by, in equal parts, local bus, flexible routes, and rideshare. So again, that's a different kind of response than we saw from the general public survey. This is what Canton did provide at the December meeting for its planning proposal for the Canton Township area. And as you can see, it is not detailed. It's basically just showing the ways that they would like to regionally connect Canton Township to other communities and what communities it's envisioning connecting Canton Township to. It doesn't get into what travel mode that would be. In other words, would this be done through microtransit? Would this be done through fixed route? Are they envisioning this as an expansion of, dial-a-ride service? They also don't talk about, what would this run on weekdays as well as weekends? Would it run at night? So it's really lacking detail right now. And they also provided a map of some of the destinations that they were hearing would be good destinations for service for Canton Township. And this included providing a regional connection to the downtown Detroit, also getting to the Amazon warehouse, going to IKEA in Canton, Schoolcraft College, and the University of Michigan in Dearborn. One thing that I think is really missing from this map is that we have heard repeatedly, and it's often been the number one choice when people are asked to choose destinations throughout the consortium, that people want to get to the airport, and this was also the number one choice basically for Canton Township. So we did find it very curious when SMART was presenting this particular slide that the airport was missing as a destination in Canton Township. They also did propose a number of routes along major corridors, and when they do use the term route, I would assume it refers to some kind of fixed route service or flex service, and they were looking at Canton Center Road, Ford Road, Haggerty, and Michigan for potential transit routes. And I don't think that's very surprising. I think that's naturally where you would look to put some kind of fixed route or flex route service in Canton. So before I move on to the timeline, any questions on what I've just discussed that was provided by SMART?
Excuse me, are they going to add the, oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay, you can go.
No,
Yeah.
you go.
Okay. So it seems like most of these proposed routes go east towards Detroit, which is great. I'm also wondering if there are plans for routes towards the west side, like Ann Arbor, Eastern Michigan, EMU, or even U of M, those places too, or downtown Ann Arbor, if those are part of the considerations.
Yeah, so the reason I think that we're not seeing any routes going west SMART map is because it would be outside of SMART service area, since SMART is it's not in Washtenaw County, right?
Okay.
Because you have the RIDE or AAA-TA in Washtenaw County.
Right.
But what I can tell you about what's being put into the planning documents right now is that the RIDE's 2045 long-range plan does include references to expanding service into western Canton Township. So I don't think it's very detailed. It's sort of like a line or two in their long-range plan, and it's vague, but it's in there. So they are talking about it. They are having discussions about how to make that regional connection with Canton Township so that residents in Canton can access the rides network moving forward. And another thing is that your own master plan that was just adopted in 2025 also makes references to connecting with the rides network. So I think it's great to see that in both the rides planning documents and in your own master plan, there's a discussion happening, and there's some symbiosis there between those planning documents. But I think as part of this project, we do need to also have a discussion with the RIDE or AAATA as we are developing our strategies and recommendations to see if we can push that a little bit further along and get something more concrete into this planning document.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
You're
I was going to say, are we going to add the airport? 'Cause that's one question, because you're right, that is the number one to me.
Yeah, so we're really pushing for a connection to the airport. Every consortium member wants a connection to the airport. All of the public want a connection to the airport, and especially what we've heard at the pop-ups is, even if someone wouldn't normally use public transit, the one scenario where they can envision their family using public transit or envision themselves using public transit is to get to and from the airport. So I think that's going to be, it would be smart of smart to include that in its plan, because it would be a huge selling point to get people to want to potentially support funding transit in the future.
So yeah, the airport was like the first thing I noticed on the map. So I was going to ask about that, but I'm glad it already came up. I did wonder, at one point we did have, like I think twice a day, the ride came into Canton to take people into Ann Arbor who worked there. And it's my understanding we don't have that anymore. And I'm just putting it out there because I want to make sure that whatever made it so that we don't have that anymore, that we fix whatever that is. Because I think that service is essential. There's so many people that go to Ann Arbor for medical needs, not to mention, educational needs, but also shopping, whatever.
Do you know how long ago it was discontinued?
It stopped at COVID, and their explanation to us was basically that there was not enough ridership. Because if you look at some of the people that go to U of M or appointments or that, it was, there were different times. So they left at, like you said, 7 a.m., came back at 3. And so their response to us when we asked was that they just didn't have the ridership.
Yeah, and I did speak to a representative at the RIDE about reestablishing that connection at the beginning of this project, and it did stop around COVID. And when I asked about potential to reestablish it, if we could show that there would be ridership, they said that they have more budgetary constraints to reestablish. So they're open to a conversation and a partnership, but they're not going to be able to fund it solely on their own anymore.
And then someone had mentioned a potential connection to Ypsilanti. I think it was you. And, another thing to keep in mind, and this probably isn't going to fall under SMART's purview, but more in the future under the RTA's purview, is that Michigan is a fast corridor. Michigan Avenue is a fast corridor. And so the RTA being more regional and encompassing, not only Wayne and Oakland and Macomb County, but also Washtenaw County, they look across borders that SMART and AAATA do not look across those same borders. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to extend that fast route, into downtown Ypsilanti through Canton, and then provide a connection to Ypsilanti that way as well in the future.
Did someone over here have a question? No, okay. Yeah, and like you said, right now our transport, Nankin Transport, which we have small, they will take you to the SMART bus system if you ask them. Not a lot of people know that, but that's another opportunity. Sorry, Mara?
Yeah, I just did a quick Google search and I almost forgot about Amtrak. I know that some folks use Amtrak, for instance, to go to Chicago, or even out of state in general. And I'm wondering, I don't know how much the ridership of Amtrak is in Michigan. I know it's more popular in other states, but any conversation around potentially having routes to Amtrak stations?
There hasn't been a lot of conversations so far about routes to Amtrak stations, but if there was a route that connected into the triple ATA network, then it would be possible to transfer to a route that would take you to like the Ann Arbor Amtrak, or also when we talk about a route into Detroit, being able to then transfer on a DDOT bus to take you to the Amtrak station that way. I also know in the RTA's regional master plan that part of the Michigan Avenue alignment also included an alignment of, I don't know how feasible this is going to be in the future at all, but an alignment for commuter rail that, kind of follows near Michigan Avenue. I think it actually does go through Canton at one point, but that would probably be something more further away. So, in terms of the timeline.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And yes, also to the point about Nankin Transit, Nankin Transit does serve riders 1 mile outside of its boundaries, which then does connect up with some of the triple ATA routes. So, any other questions on SMART before I continue on with the project timeline?
Go ahead.
Okay, great. So this project is moving along pretty quickly. I want to preface it by saying that Aaron's team did a lot of groundwork before our contract was signed. So a lot of the public outreach was already done even before we started working on this project, like the township survey that was done, the public survey. Also, the Canton Township pop-up was already completed before we came on board, and a lot of the stakeholder and focus group interviews were also ongoing when we came on board. But our portion of the project started in July, and I just say that to be like, the project started before us. But we kicked off in July, and then we have been working in phase 2 up until the holidays, more or less, where we've been gathering data and analyzing it from an existing conditions perspective. The public and stakeholder engagement on this project is fairly robust and goes throughout most of the timeline of the project. We have held 2 TSC meetings, as I mentioned. The first one was really kind of to introduce the project and set some expectations around goals for the project. And the second TSC meeting was then to review existing conditions. We've finishing up our first round of community engagement. We'll do a second round of community engagement. You can see on this timeline in the spring. We're going to hold a third TSC meeting in the spring as well to present the draft strategies. Then we will hold a fourth TSC meeting again later in the spring to present the refined strategies. And then we'll do one more round of board and commission meetings around June. So that's the timeline. And as I mentioned, we have been going through the existing conditions review. We have completed a background document review where we looked at all 7 consortium members, master plans, mobility plans, and other relevant planning documents. Some of them had like a Safe Streets for All plan, or maybe a strategic plan. And we looked at all of those. And what I did here is try to categorize them based off of what we found in the plan for how much they're thinking about public transit within their communities. And what we found is Canton Township, the City of Westland, and Van Buren Township, they have all put explicit implementation actions or strategies into their master planning documents or other documents that are related to getting some public transit in their communities, or expanding existing, in the case of Westland, expanding existing public transit or improving it within their community. Then we have another category here, it's transit supportive. It's where the plans mention being supportive of transit, but they aren't really laying out anything actionable in the planning documents related to making improvements in transit or adding it to the community. And that includes City of Northville, Northville Township, and the City of Plymouth. And then what we found when we reviewed the Plymouth Township documents is that they're very quiet on transit. There really isn't any in their planning documents related to Plymouth Township. And then we also have an existing conditions base map. We developed it as an interactive base map initially right now for internal client use, but it could be converted to a public map for future outreach. We can also embed it in the future into a story map webpage where we could present some of the strategies that are being proposed under this study. And it's got data layers that toggle on and off. I have provided a QR link here if you'd like to check it out. The reason that we made it interactive rather than static is because transit doesn't stop at borders, and when you have a static map, there's inherently a border to it. So we wanted to be able to show the larger regional transit network and how all of the transit that we have is connecting or where it isn't connecting right now. And it's also harder when we have seven different consortium communities to really make it fit all on one static map. Now, for the sake of this PowerPoint presentation, we did take screenshots of the interactive map and put them into slides in the presentation, but the map is really intended to be used as an interactive map. So again, here's one of the screenshots, and then I'm going to go through a series of these screenshots of the layers of the interactive map just to show you a little bit about what we've done so far with the existing conditions. This is a map of the existing public transit service. As you can see, the only community within the 7-member consortium that currently has transit is the City of Westland. It is served by SMART. Now, I say I mean fixed route transit, because obviously Canton does have Nankin Transit as well, which is also in Westland too. And so you can see the Nankin Transit service overlay here, and in the southwest corner of Canton, you can see where it goes 1 mile outside of Canton and just barely connects up with some of the rides routes there. So there is a connection, and then you can also see where it goes a little bit into where it's in Westland, it's overlapping with SMART routes as well. So there's connections, but they're not great, and there's a lot of room for improvement. This is a map of where the jobs are concentrated in the consortium, and what you can see is that there is a concentration, maybe the largest concentration of jobs at Ann Arbor Road and Haggerty in Plymouth Township. Then you also have another concentration in Canton along Ford Road near I-275, and then concentrations in downtown Plymouth and Northville, and then out by Beck Road near M14 where there's a lot of light industrial. These are the commuter patterns that we looked at. You do have more people leaving the consortium area for work than are coming into it. So you have 107,683 workers leaving the consortium and 75,085 coming into it. For Canton Township, you've got about 20,000 or 20,400 people coming into Canton for work, and you have 41,660 people leaving the township for work. So you have more people, almost double the people leaving Canton Township than coming into it for jobs. And this was the case with most of the communities, except like the City of Plymouth actually has more people coming in for work, and actually it was slightly more for the City of Northville as well. And that makes sense with their downtowns. And then in terms of population density, when we ran the data, there are areas of higher density in eastern Canton, northwest Plymouth, and then there's pockets just all throughout Westland and Van Buren. And this is all relative because in this case, higher density, it never really hits that highest threshold. It's all kind of between 5,000 and 10,000 individuals per square mile. So it's semi-dense in those little pockets, but not really. And then for the senior population, there's areas of higher senior population in northeast and central Canton, all throughout Westland, again, southeast Plymouth, west side of the city of Plymouth, and all of the city of Northville, and then isolated pockets in Northville and Van Buren townships. And what's kind of interesting is that the youth population mirrors on a certain level what we saw with the senior population. So the areas that tend to have higher senior population also somewhat have higher youth population. I would say the exception maybe is the city of Northville, which doesn't mirror that. But areas of higher density for the youth population include central Canton, most of Westland, southeast Plymouth, the west side of the city of Plymouth, the north side of Northville, and then again, there's isolated pockets here and there with the other communities. And I'm going through this kind of fast because there's a lot of slides. And if you do have questions, just let me know though. So this is individuals with disabilities, and there's areas of higher density for individuals with disabilities. Again, throughout most of Westland, you might be noticing a pattern where the city of Westland tended to have a little bit of everything with these demographics, and it was always kind of scattered throughout. And then Northeast Canton also had a higher concentration, as well as most of the city of Plymouth, and then there was like one isolated pocket in Northeast Van Buren. And the zero-car households was interesting because there's that one pocket, it's isolated along Ford Road in Canton, and I know that we've discussed it in a previous meeting, and I think there's some senior retirement communities down there that might be causing it to spike a little bit. And then also throughout southern Westland, there are a number of zero-car households as well as northwest Westland. Otherwise, throughout the consortium, we're really not seeing a concentration of zero-car households. This is a map of the lower income households. The areas of higher density for lower income households included north central Westland, southern Westland, and then northeast Canton. And then these are unemployed individuals. And the areas of higher density for this included much of Westland, north central Canton, western Plymouth, and southeast Northville Township. And then we also looked at a transit score for consortium, and this basically is a compilation of data points related to older adults, youth, minorities, households in poverty, limited English proficiency, transit-dependent households, female-headed households, and households with disabilities. And what we found is that there's pockets, again, all through Westland, and also that pocket along Ford Road where there seems to be some retirement communities that had also shown up on the zero-car household map. And then there's also a pocket along the east side of Canton, as well as along the southern border of Canton. Otherwise, outside of Canton and Westland, the other 5 consortium communities really didn't have very high scores with the transit-dependent scores. And even the scores that Canton had were just kind of, I would say, medium high. Only Westland had a score that was high. So in terms of the findings, probably as you looked through those maps, it became obvious with the pattern, but Westland had the greatest need for transit just based off of its demographics, such as dependent age riders, the density of individuals with disabilities, and the density of unemployed individuals, as well as that transit equity map that I had just put up. The west side of the city of Plymouth had a high geographic concentration of dependent ages with higher disability rates and unemployment, but when you take into account some other factors, it didn't score at all on the transit dependency map. So that's, quite different, even though you do have those other factors at play. And then that area that I mentioned of Canton that was bordered by Ford, Salts, North Canton Center, and North Lilly had a higher density of dependent riders, individuals with disabilities, the zero-car households, and unemployed individuals. So that really does show a need to have some sort of fixed route transportation along Ford Road, just, alone for that, never mind that it's also a major commercial corridor. So
Does the city of Plymouth have those high numbers because of their, they have some of the group homes there? Is that correct? Is that why you see that?
we're still investigating, but that could be the case. I don't know.
They have some group homes near the center area there,
Ah.
in some of the houses.
So we're also working on a trends, gaps, and needs analysis that's basically looking at best practices from other regions around the country. Especially, we're trying to look at regions where they didn't have transit in a specific geographic area, and then they started to provide transit services in an area that previously didn't have them, and especially if that was as the result of some sort of new funding that came into play, like a millage. And so the case studies that we're going to be looking at for that include Grand Rapids area, Denver, Omaha, and Columbus. Again, this is the region as a whole. It's not just limited to like the city of Grand Rapids or the city of Denver, but also encompasses their suburbs as well. That's still in progress. We don't have the findings from that yet. And I'm going to do an engagement update now, unless, were there any other questions on the existing conditions?
Mayor?
Go ahead.
How, I went to this, the page you showed, excuse me, the page, the commuter patterns. And it looks like Plymouth, I'm wondering why Plymouth's not interested. I'm looking at the numbers. They got a lot of people that come there and a small that's go out.
Yes, so Plymouth Township or city?
Plymouth Township.
Yeah, because both,
Your interpretation is that maybe they're not thinking about transit, or they're just not, I mean, you said it's nothing mentioned about it. And I'm just trying to see if there's a reason that they don't see a need right now. And I'm not saying that. I think there's a planner in Plymouth that's thinking this way. That's how I'm thinking.
yeah, I mean, they're a consortium member, so I think now they're starting to think more about
Okay.
transit, but I'm not sure if in the recent past they were thinking as much
Sure.
about transit.
Now it's on top of your mind, now, or coming there at least, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
all right.
I think they're getting there.
okay.
So.
That's fair. That's a fair.
Yeah, Aaron, I don't know if you have anything else that you want to add?
Yeah, you would know.
or-
Just that we've had conversations with Plymouth Township Supervisor and trying to find out if they have had any conversations with their residents or anything about transit, and we've been told no, they have not had that conversation. Emphatically, no, they have not had that conversation.
Didn't they send out the same survey that we sent out
They did, yes.
and did not get any responses?
We did get some responses from Plymouth Township.
Okay.
And when we did the pop-up, we heard from people who, in the Plymouth Township pop-up, that people did want public transit. So there's a little bit of a disconnect from what administration is telling us versus what the public is telling us. But if they hadn't had any conversations related to transit, they may not know what people are needing or wanting.
Okay, thank you.
So, a quick question then. Let's say, for example, in Plymouth Township, the millage passes, but Plymouth Township is not implementing, hypothetically, what its residents are asking for. What happens then?
So I think that, Plymouth Township is just one of the decision-making bodies that is involved in implementing transit in Western Wayne County, and ultimately it probably will rest with SMART on whether they choose to put routes through Plymouth Township if there is funding for an expansion of transit in Western Wayne County. So it definitely looks like from all the data and even from the meetings that Aaron and I and Patrick have attended with SMART that there is it looks like there's a need for fixed route transit along that kind of Ann Arbor Road, Haggerty corridor area, in that general area, because there is such a large concentration of jobs. Just to, again, throw this jobs map back on the screen, where you see the largest concentration of jobs is in that section of Plymouth Township. So
Right,
I think there's a real need to serve that with transit.
right, okay.
They'll basically probably get what they get, right? Basically, whatever smart or if determines, yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else? Okay.
So just to talk a little bit about the engagement, and then actually we'll touch on some of the engagement that was done in the other consortium member communities like Plymouth Township. This was the toolbox that we started with, and what we've done in this first round of engagement is primarily relied on public surveys. We did a business survey as well that we'll talk about. There were focus groups and stakeholder interviews that were conducted that primarily Aaron facilitated, and then there have been community pop-ups in all of the consortium communities to an extent. There's sort of one exception, although the one pop-up we did cover that too. I'll get into that in a minute. The engagement schedule that we have used is that there were 2 TSC meetings so far, and I mentioned those. The first one was September 17th. The second one was recently on December 4th. There are 2 more upcoming in March and May. I know I already talked about that, so I won't repeat myself. And then we have completed, I say we, but really Canton Township, prior to OHM coming on board, completed the public survey. That community survey went out to multiple consortium members, including Canton Township, the City of Plymouth, and Plymouth Township, and I think there were also responses from Van Buren Township that were in the mix on that survey. And then Erin and her team facilitated a number of stakeholder meetings and focus group meetings as well over the summertime, and we'll talk about those in a minute. And then also, as I mentioned, the pop-ups were done, the business survey just closed, and then we've got that second round of engagement coming in April. And now we are very much into doing the board and commission meetings where we are going to each consortium member and attending of their choice, either a Board of Trustees meeting, a City Council meeting, a Planning Commission meeting, or something like this where there's a joint meeting happening, so that we can get the feedback from the officials in those communities and elected officials on what they would like to see for strategies. So for the community transit survey, and again, I'll preface this by saying this was done prior to OHM's involvement. It was done over the summer. You guys had an amazing response rate of 935 survey responses. I know Erin wanted it to hit 1,000, but it's really close. There were 508 responses from Canton residents, and then 255 responses from zip codes that would encompass either the City of Plymouth or Plymouth Township. And then there were an additional 37 responses from zip codes that are probably Van Buren Township, given that it was the consortium member, but the zip code actually covers Belleville, Huron Township, and Sumter Township as well. And there was a real mix of age groups that took the survey, although primarily 25% of the respondents on the survey were over 65 years old. So it did lean a little bit older. And I guess if you look at the 55 and up, that would have encompassed 45% of responses. So it was a little harder to get input from younger adults. In terms of how often people use transit, 75% said when needed but not regularly. And then the other 25% are either using it daily, weekly, or a few times per month, which is kind of surprising, again, in an area where there isn't currently any fixed route transit, right? Like all of the respondents came from areas that at best have a dial-a-ride service. And what's also unique about this is that even though the respondents came from Canton Township, City of Plymouth, Plymouth Township, and Van Buren, 18% of them are somehow using SMART, even though it doesn't even service the geographic areas that responded to the survey. which I don't know if that means that they are taking Nankin and then transferring to SMART, or if they're having someone drop them off on a SMART route, or they're like biking across the border. But it seems to me that when you have 18% of your survey respondents taking, or sorry, I should say, when you have 18% of your survey respondents who said that they use transit, and they're using SMART, there's probably a need for fixed route transit in that area. And then you had another 15% using DDOT, and then 4% of transit riders were using Nankin, 3% People's Express. There were a lot of options given for reasons not to use public transit, but the three top options that received the most responses were kind of a lack of visibility of transit or lack of knowledge around transit. Accessibility to transit was really almost like the second and third response, because 40% or 41% of respondents said that they were in a geographic area that is not served by transit for their needs. And another 40 or 39% said that the problem was inaccessible stops. So there is a real access to transit issue around why people are discouraged from using transit within the public survey area. And that's not surprising because, again, the public survey respondents came from communities that are currently opting out of SMART service. So there was another question asked: what public transit services would you like to see incorporated or expanded into your community? And again, much like the pop-up responses that we will talk about in a little bit, the number one thing that people said that they wanted to see for transit modes was fixed route service out of those 935 responses, which if you think back to the statistics that we showed you for SMART at the beginning of this presentation, this is kind of flipped from the data that SMART gathered. Again, I think that's because SMART was not looking at the general public. I see there's a question.
Yeah, just wondering, does fixed route mean bus only, or does it mean other forms of transportation that have fixed routes?
It could mean other forms of transportation that have fixed routes, like bus rapid transit, for instance. But in this case, it would just mean bus-only transit as far as what we're talking about for the services that SMART is offering. I'm sure in other communities it might mean light rail. Right. But not in Southeast Michigan as much.
Mayor? I think people just need a schedule they know that's going to be there. Personally, it doesn't matter if it's bus or whatever. You go to other cities, you know when it's going to come. They can actually tell you. That's what you need. You need to have it on your phone and all that stuff. I think if it's fixed or not, as long as it's consistent and people know that it's going to be there, I think you're okay. Personally, that's just me.
And we'll talk a little bit about some of the, when we met with the TSC last time, we did a Mentimeter poll, and we asked them about the type of technology that they'd most like to see expanded into Western Wayne County. And so there was some discussion around having, a real-time arrival app, or there's also, real-time arrival signage that can be put up at bus shelters. And I know that SMART does have an app that is supposed to track the buses. I don't know how effective it is, but they have an app that it supposedly does do that. So if the service did expand into Western Wayne County, I assume that that app would also be expanded into this geographic area. So in terms of the amenities that are most important to include at public transit bus stops, what Canton Township and City Plymouth, Plymouth Township, and Van Buren heard from the respondents was they most wanted to see covered enclosed structures. 73% of respondents asked for that. And actually, to your previous question, 69% of respondents asked for live tracking of some kind. So whether, again, through an app or through real-time arrival signage. And then the number 3 response was lighting. And what I'd like to also point out about the top 3 responses for amenities is that they all kind of fit under the larger umbrella of personal security and comfort while waiting for the bus, because you know, when you are in an enclosed structure, there's typically lighting that accompanies that, so it increases your personal security. The live tracking gives you a sense of knowing exactly when the bus comes, so you're not waiting there longer than you need to be. So this is something that we see over and over again, is that when people are asked what amenities they want to see, they typically choose amenities that would increase their personal security and make them feel safer while waiting for public transit. There were a series of stakeholder meetings done, again, prior to OHM, or maybe right at the beginning of OHM's involvement with the process. There were 4 Canton resident meetings and then 1 meeting of Canton businesses in the summer of 2025. A total of 27 residents and 3 business owners participated in those meetings, and they ranged in age. It was a great range, from 17 years old to 69 years old. Generally, it was a mix of drivers and transit users. 23% had a commute that currently includes transit, and then only 10% had never used transit. Aaron also attended a resident know-how meeting on September 18th. In terms of some of the findings that were heard at these stakeholder meetings, there were a number of frequently suggested transit stops that include Ford Road, Haggerty, Michigan Avenue, Meyer IKEA, and then of course the connections to Plymouth, Northville, and Ann Arbor. You'll notice that the airport's not listed here, and that's because I didn't really see that in the responses, which is interesting. Just with the stakeholders, which is a smaller group, it's only 30 people, but they didn't really bring up the airport as much. The most cited resident concerns included bus safety, Ford Road traffic. That one came up a lot, especially around construction. Stop accessibility and ADA infrastructure, and then the existing Nankin operational hours and wait times. They wanted to see those expanded. They didn't feel like they were sufficient for daily travel needs. In terms of what the businesses said was their major concern, and this probably isn't surprising, they said employee retention and to a certain degree employee acquisition. That's just hard sometimes to find employees when their business isn't served by public transit. The most cited resident suggestions included biking infrastructure that would help increase accessibility to transit, as well as just regional transit connections so that you can get to Detroit or Ann Arbor. Or again, they didn't explicitly mention the airport here, but I would assume that encompasses it as well. And then the business suggestions also emphasized regional connections because, of course, if you're a business owner, if you can expand, or rather, if transit has an expansive reach across a region, you're more likely to find an employee to work at your business. And Aaron, I just wanted to ask, because I wasn't personally in these stakeholder meetings, was there anything else that you wanted to add about your experiences with the stakeholders? Okay.
They were really great conversations, and we had some, not only asking just the general public if they wanted to come and talk to us, but specifically targeting groups that I know have vested interest in transit. So people who use the Nankin systems. We have a number of IDD communities that, or developments that are in progress right now. And so I made a point to discuss with them on what their future residents were going to need because they serve a very specific community base. And we also wanted to talk to the business owners. So we'll get, Adriana will talk about the business survey in a second, but in addition to just asking people at large, we really targeted some groups to make sure that we heard specific concerns.
So you did speak to then the Nankin transport users?
Yes.
They're part of the group? Okay.
Yes.
So I'm going to cover the pop-ups now, and there were pop-ups conducted in Canton Township. I was not involved with that particular pop-up because, again, it was prior to OHM coming on board. And then there was a pop-up with the city of Plymouth at the Fall Festival, Plymouth Township, We went to Fire Safety Day there, and actually, if you look at the image on the screen, it is a family placing stickers on the board, and you can see the little boy dressed as a fireman, which is really cute. And then also the City of Westland, we did a trunk or treat pop-up there around Halloween, had an amazing response, and I've got a picture of that too, what the boards looked like from that. And then we also did a pop-up in Van Buren Township at a blood drive. Actually, was the Van Buren Township the blood drive, or was City of Northville? One of them was a blood drive. And then we did a pop-up at the City of Northville Community Center. And you'll notice that Northville Township is not on here, but it was our understanding that the community center for the City of Northville was also open to residents of Northville Township. So even though we didn't explicitly do one in Northville Township, it was kind of covered through that community center. So in terms of the pop-up statistics, there were 1,185 total stickers placed on the destination board exercise, which just asked people where they would like to go for destinations within or even regionally. And the destinations did change slightly for every community. They had slightly different boards just depending on what destinations were within their community. Most of the regional destinations didn't change, just generally we always had Ann Arbor and Detroit and the airport on there for regional destinations. Northville, I think, had like Novi on there as well, that sort of thing. And then again, there were specific destinations to those communities on the boards as well. There were 62 total stickers placed on the transit mode board exercise, and the modes that people could choose from included fixed route, deviated fixed route, and then microtransit and dial-a-ride / demand response. And then there were 77 post-it note comments. And maybe I should mention too, the deviated fixed route, when I'm saying that, it's typically where you will have a route that's followed on a regularly scheduled basis, but it can deviate like a half mile out of the way to pick up or drop off passengers, or a mile out of the way, just depending on what parameters are set. So it has some of the characteristics of demand response service, but is more regularly scheduled and reliable. So for Canton specifically and its summer pop-up, it was done at the Liberty Fest on June 14th. 45 participants answered the question on preferred transit modes, and again, reflecting the results of what we saw with that larger public survey. Fixed routes were the preferred transit mode of residents that participated in the Canton pop-up, with 55% choosing fixed routes. That was followed with paratransit, or the demand response, at 27%, and then microtransit at 18%. So again, not surprising, but does not reflect the data that SMART collected. And then in terms of potential locations for public transit, here you see that the airport was the #1 location cited where as a destination that people in Canton Township wanted to get to. And that was out of a total of 529 votes. And then the second most asked for destination, and this speaks to the conversation that we were having earlier about the ride, was that people wanted to get to the city of Ann Arbor. And then that was followed by the library, Summit on the Park, and Canton's Civic Center campus, basically. And then Ford Road. But yes, the airport and Ann Arbor were the two top destinations, and then Detroit came in 5th on the list of destinations most desired by your residents.
Can I, just a comment. I consider Canton close to the airport. People stay with us because the airport is close, so close. I'm thinking this number would be higher if it was available elsewhere. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Canton is natural because we think we're right at the airport, and still we want public transit to the airport. Do you catch that?
Yeah.
So I'm thinking if you're further away, you might want it even more if it was
Yeah.
available.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just psychologically, I'm thinking about this, and like I said, people stay with us because we're close to the airport. It's
Yeah.
only, what, 10 minutes, 15 minutes away? So
Right. It's a little
Anyway.
easier to get your neighbors to drop you off in Canton than if you're coming from,
Yes.
like, Northville Township or something to.
Exactly. So I'm just thinking if this would be a great way to market the transit. I mean, I think you hit it when you said that.
Yeah.
If you can show that as one of your goals, I think more people will buy in, and they'll buy with the millage probably.
Yeah.
You're going to pay that much to park anyway.
Yes, I agree.
I have a question about transit to Detroit. So currently, Detroit is serviced under Detroit Department of Transportation, not SMART.
Yes.
So once the transit millage passes, will they be under SMART, or will they have their own transportation system? And will SMART connect to their transportation system? I'm just wondering about Canton residents getting downtown or somewhere within the city of Detroit.
Yeah, that's a great question. The city of Detroit currently opts out of SMART. And so with this being a countywide millage, they would also have to vote to opt into SMART, even though they are already serviced by DDOT. And what that looks like for how services would change is probably beyond the level of my expertise for this particular project, because we're not really looking at what's happening in Detroit. But I know that there's a lot of speculation on, what that would look like. It's unlikely that SMART would concentrate on adding routes into Detroit, per se, well, like, and adding routes in Detroit, but what they might do is, add more routes going to Detroit, on behalf of the communities that are not in the DDOT service area, right? So, but that remains to be seen.
I'm just wondering if the people that would support transit because they want an easy way to get downtown, would that impact their support of a transit millage if they could not, in fact, get downtown?
Yeah, I don't see it becoming harder to get downtown. I think it's only going to become easier to get downtown with the passage of this. Because then you also don't have, right now you kind of have, even though some SMART routes do go into the city of Detroit, there is still sort of that idea of like there being a border between SMART's jurisdiction and DDOT's jurisdiction. And I think that border gets more blurred after this, if it's funded, so. So what we saw in terms of the findings from these pop-ups, again, we were just talking about this, but most frequently the airport was the #1 cited destination among all 7 consortium communities. And then second to that were the nearby larger cities like Detroit or like Ann Arbor, as well as parks. Also were fairly high on the list. In terms of destinations that people would like to travel to, the airport received the highest number of stickers. It received 135 stickers, or 11% of all of the stickers placed during the pop-up events. Also just wanted to point out this picture here. This is from the Westland Trunk or Treat. And we were told, not to maybe expect a lot of participation with the boards because people were just kind of going to be coming through and grabbing candy. And as you can see, the boards were covered. People were really enthusiastic about participating in this exercise in Westland. And I actually feel very, very bad for my colleague who had to count all the dots on that board. So because it was a lot. But we had great participation in Westland. So 56% of respondents of all 7 consortium communities that participated in the pop-ups were most interested in fixed routes. Again, we've kind of talked about this. It's the opposite of what SMART's heard, which is interesting. And then generally, there's a lot of interest in public transportation from the individuals that were coming by to participate in the pop-ups. However, we don't know if there was a little bit of self-selection at play with people who were already more interested in transit stopping and participating, whereas maybe people who had less of an interest in transit would have kept walking by. We can't really gauge that, but that's just something to keep in mind. So there was also a business survey that we've just wrapped up. The business survey ran from November 24th through January 6th. And we didn't get a huge amount of responses on this, but again, because it's not a survey that's going out to the general public, it's kind of a niche group. So we only received 34 responses from businesses and only 2 from Canton. Most of the responses we received were from Plymouth, which was 31% of the responses, and then the Van Buren-Belleville area at 28% of responses. What we heard from the business community, and the business community could encompass either business owners or their employees, they emphasized that convenience was the most important factor in determining which mode of transportation to use, and this makes sense, especially when you're thinking about making sure that businesses are running properly, opening on time. The reliability and the convenience is extremely important. And then 18% shared that access to reliable transportation has impacted their business's ability to retain employees, which is a substantial share of businesses. That's almost 20% of businesses that are having impacts from the lack of, a secondary, like if your car breaks down, then what are you going to do? Especially when Uber and Lyft might be very expensive to take. If there was some sort of transit service you could take, then you would be a more reliable employee to that business. So also in terms of some of the business survey findings, the most preferred improvements were, and this is interesting because it doesn't reflect what we heard from the general public, microtransit was what the businesses most wanted to see, and that was followed by express fixed routes, so like the fast routes, and then increased frequency. And so I don't know if that's a reflection of more of the entrepreneurial mindset with this idea of microtransit being kind of like a newer technology or a newer mode, but I did find that interesting because microtransit did not score highly on either the SMART survey or on the public survey that Canton did or on the pop-ups, but it did on the business survey. And then in terms of the most preferred amenities, this was fairly consistent across the board no matter what cohort we were looking at. Again, bus shelters, security cameras, lighting, that emphasis on your personal security at a bus stop while waiting for a bus.
This might be thinking also, if you drop somebody off a mile down the road, they're not going to work here because they can't get here. Thinking, yeah, they'll be late, so they probably want to.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
That could be the thinking for.
Ford Road's pretty long, and if you get dropped off at IKEA, but you work at Canton Center.
Yeah. So as I mentioned at the second Transportation Steering Committee meeting, we did run a Mentimeter poll. We actually had to run it after the meeting because the Mentimeter servers have been having some difficulties over the past month. I hope they've resolved them. But what we saw in terms of the Mentimeter results, and again, the individuals who were taking this poll were members of the consortium. So it was the representatives from Canton Township or City of Plymouth, Township, City of Northville Township, Van Buren, Westland. So what the representatives said they would like to see most is an expansion to the airport. No big surprise there, followed by a shuttle to Detroit, followed by a shuttle to Ann Arbor, and then fixed routes was kind of like number 4 on there for local fixed routes. And then we asked which potential fixed routes should be prioritized, and by and large, people said Ford Road Commercial Corridor, and that was followed by fixed routes to the downtowns of Plymouth and Northville. One thing I want to point out here that I thought was very interesting, Wayne Road and Central City Parkway was a segment of the city of Westland that is currently not served by SMART's fixed route transit, but it scored very highly in all of the criteria that we looked at for the existing conditions, which is why we added it in here, especially on the transit equity map for transit dependency. And it's interesting just that it got the least amount of votes when we were asked about potential fixed routes, even though it probably had objectively the highest need for a fixed route. But that could also be a reflection of this perception that Westland already has transit services, whereas the other communities don't yet. So we also asked, what stop improvements would you like to see in your community? Again, we've seen this consistently no matter which group we're polling: shelters with benches, better lighting, real-time arrival signs. So it's that emphasis, once more, on your personal security while you're waiting for the bus. What is the best way to market transit in your community? What we heard by and large is that social media is still the most effective way to market transit and transit services in the community, to promote new services. E-blast was a close second, and then word of mouth. And word of mouth is an interesting one because what does that really mean? Does that mean that you do kind of maybe, if transit services are expanded out into West Rowan County, do you do like an ambassador program to kind of put the word out there? Or is it more just like, are you relying on your family, friends, and neighbors to tell you that there is transit in your community? So I think we should investigate that a little bit more as part of the study. And then we asked a question about transit tech. What transit tech is most important for your community? And I do want to emphasize that this list is not a list of tech that we don't have in the region, right? Because we do have, like SMART does have an app that shows real-time route information, and Nankin has an app for curb-to-curb dial-a-ride services already. So this isn't like technology that we're missing, but it's technology. We were just trying to get an idea of what people need the most in terms of, or what they appreciate the most in terms of technology. Mobility wallet came in third, and the RTA is piloting a mobility wallet program right now. So all of these technologies exist. The RTA? Yeah. So all of these technologies exist in some form, although they may not actually exist right now in your community. And then we also asked, would you be interested in partnering with other consortium members on future grants? And I know Erin was really excited about the response on this one, but nobody said no. So a majority said yes, some people said maybe, and there were no-nos, which I think is really promising, because I think that's one of the ways where this consortium could continue onwards in the future. Because there are a lot of grants for things like access to transit or other types of infrastructure that can increase, the usage of transit in the future, and support transit in ways that the providers can't do for you, that really are more coming from your communities. So I think this is very promising. In terms of next steps, we have to finish analyzing the round one engagement. That last pop-up just wrapped up, and although we kind of have the results in terms of a PowerPoint, we still need to put it into a report form. We need to complete that trends, gaps, and needs analysis, where we're looking at those national case studies that have been in similar situations to what's going on in Southeast Michigan, and see how they were successful in their expansion of transit. We also need to prep the existing conditions technical memo. We've kind of finished the conditions analysis, but now we need to put it into a formal memo. And then we are just at the very beginning stage of attending these board and commission meetings. This is our first one, and we now have them scheduled out through March 3rd. We are still actively scheduling with consortium members, but we've got 2 more on the calendar now. And then as we move into next month, we'll start developing the mobility focus areas. That really kicks off in February, and then we'll hold that 3rd TSC meeting in March to get feedback on those initial strategies that we're developing. So that's it for the slides, and I'm sure you have more questions.
Questions or comments?
Aaron, I agree with you when you see that no one said no. We're in a different era. I've never seen this before. I've been in planning my whole life almost. They want to work together. It's beautiful.
As long as we lead it, that's what happens. Can't you lead it, we'll follow. I guess one thing, oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, go ahead.
So February 3rd, Assad is going to go before the Conference of Western Wayne and the Downriver Community, and he's going to present what their vision is. So that's why we kind of wanted to get this in quick. And I noticed some of your dates are after that. So all the data that you found, I know you've been working with them, but I told Assad, it says, you really need to hear what we have here, because it seems like what, Diana attended one of those meetings that they're not aligning with what you've found here. So is the county in your meetings at all, or hearing what you're saying, or do we need to pull Assad in and sit him down?
So I can address that a little bit, but I should warn you, my battery was about to die.
Oh, it's okay.
That's what I was about to say.
Okay.
And I got to it before I could say that. So my computer is shutting down now. I did not realize that this was not also a power source. So we have been feeding information to not the county, but to SMART, right? So we're not sending information to Wayne County as of right now, but we have been forwarding all of our outreach materials as we complete them in their raw form to Jordan Van Zinda, who's the VP of Planning and Innovation at SMART. And we just sent him over some more information today, and I know he got it because he said thank you. So we're not waiting till we have final products, because we know that they're moving very, very quickly, and we want to make sure that they are hearing the voices of the community members with all of the outreach that's been done on this project.
Amara, go ahead.
So the slide where you talked about transit tech, I'm really curious to know, so we had addressed disability earlier, and I'm wondering, how can we make transit tech or information about routes more accessible to those who are hard of seeing or have other sort of disabilities that prevent them, or make it harder for them to use an app to know routes? What's that's just something to consider. I don't know if it's been thought through, but yeah.
Yeah, that's something that we do tend to consider as we're developing strategies, whether it's something where there's readable text, right, where it'll read out the text to you, or, including Braille in any sort of wayfinding signage that might be part of a bus shelter, or also, translating into different languages as needed, depending on the profiles of different communities' demographics. And there's also, when we are putting maps together, just considering the legibility of the maps. So for instance, if someone is colorblind, we're going to be able to understand and read the map.
Yeah.
So.
And the last thing, if we think about transit and like the purpose of transit, it is to make life easier. And also there are lots of families who potentially live in multi-generational households, or parents with young kids who just need to get to work. And like one thing to think about too is like if there are potential routes to daycare centers or schools or other places where we're also considering the whole family and the needs of younger children within the context of conversations around transportation.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because that's something that, not just on this project, but on other projects, I've been looking into a little bit over the last couple of years. A majority of, if you look at the demographics of transit riders, it skews, slightly towards women, just a little bit, and also majority of caregivers, statistically,
Yep.
tend to be women, whether they're caregiving for elderly parents or children.
Right.
That's changing, but it's changing slowly. The way that our transit systems were designed in this country tends to be also, and this is something to keep in mind as we're as smart maybe as designing transit systems, but they tended to be designed based off of having kind of a central hub and then having spokes that go out from that central hub. It was based off of this idea of transit being primarily to get people to and from job centers and work. And what they found is that when you start looking at how transit would serve caregivers, it needs to be more of a spider web, if you will. I mean, it's a system where you have to have kind of interconnected rings that, allow the spaces in between the radials to also have coverage, right? So that's a different way of designing transit systems than how we've traditionally done it in the United States. And there's some emphasis growing on changing the way that we're designing transit systems. And I think there's an opportunity here with the expansion out into Western Wayne County to maybe give more consideration to how you might design a transit system that doesn't just serve workers, but also serves other needs, other errands, caregivers in the future, because there's a lot more what's called trip chaining that's usually part of a commute that involves caregiving on one end of, I mean, maybe even if you're still going to work, but you're also picking up a child from childcare, right? And now you've got multiple stops that you have to take into account. So that's something that we're considering.
As part of this plan or as a future thing?
So it's something that we'll consider as part of the strategies for this plan. And we did also include, and I'm sorry that my laptop died, but we did also include as an answer, a potential answer to some of the questions, like for destinations, caregiving facilities, like was one of the answers that was an option to choose. It didn't get a lot of people choosing it, but we made sure to include it as an option. And in the past, I think it was less likely to even be an option on these kinds of transit feedback instruments.
Okay, thank you.
I just want to make a real quick comment. Great presentation. I'm glad you were able to bring it to both boards. And Erin, you've been doing such a great job on outreach. I think it's so important. People really haven't been thinking about transportation for a long time, and it's here, and it's going to happen. And so to have this area have a voice in it, because once they start collecting all of those dollars, they have to have a plan, and every year that plan's going to grow. So I'm really glad that, we're having this conversation, and hopefully you're able to talk to the other communities as well. So thanks for the presentation, and I'm looking forward to seeing more. Thanks.
Go ahead, Doug.
I just want to make a comment, and those of you who heard my presentation to the board this week about wireless communications, you might feel this comment is somewhat self-serving, and it's not intended to be, but in thinking and tying this concept to that discussion, I think when you see what people want in technology with apps for transportation, amenities at stops, whether it's for free Wi-Fi or be able to monitor their schedules and that sort of thing, I think this demonstrates yet another need to have robust wireless / broadband communications in the township. So the discussion last week is not mutually exclusive from this discussion. I think there's definitely a need to consider both concepts and how they do tie together. So just something to keep in mind as you go forward thinking about both things.
Very true. Anyone else? So you had said in a meeting, Diane, you were there, and I think Erin with SMART in December, as you had shown. And they had looked at fixed route stops near IKEA on Ford Road, then near Amazon on Michigan Avenue. And I think, they basically said this is kind of what they're seeing. But then I sent a note after you guys had some questions to Jordan from SMART, kind of listing some of those, and I asked basically one of them about DTW, saying, and I said, when you list Romulus as a destination, because I think that was another destination they had listed on theirs, does that mean DTW or downtown Romulus? And they just said, travel pattern we use to analyze trips between communities, but we do understand DTW is a primary driver of destination trips to Romulus, which was echoed through our stakeholder outreach meetings. But then they didn't show it on their plan, which was interesting, because they're saying they saw that also. So I think that's something to push home. But IKEA, just to let you know, also has said in other meetings I've been in with them that they would be interested in running a shuttle up and down Ford Road to pick up their employees. So to place something at IKEA might not benefit other stores. So it seems to me to be better in the middle of Ford Road, the retail corridor, and IKEA could pick up their employees so people have equal distance to maybe some of the areas. But based on what you're seeing, where on Ford Road do you see fixed routes, fixed stops should be? What are you thinking? Or do you see that yet?
So I don't think we're far enough along because we really aren't starting to look specifically at the strategies or the planning for this particular project until February, because we wanted to finish all of the engagement first in the existing conditions. So I think we can tell you that answer in about a month.
You think you'll have it before February 13th when Assad comes forward and says, this is where you guys are getting it? Because we want to give him a nudge that way.
We can certainly try to have something to give him before February 13th.
Okay, and you might want to talk to IKEA also, because they're willing to bus their people to their store.
I wonder if Wayne County's motivation is thinking of a place on like the northeastern portion of Canton and also on the southwestern portion of Canton, and that's why they chose, because nobody needs to take transit to Amazon, right? And so, so like maybe the answer is thinking of an additional place in the middle,
Right.
And not just those two opposite corners of Canton.
I think when they were referencing Amazon and even IKEA to a certain extent, it was for the employees, not for people going there to shop or anything like that. Yeah, because honestly, who's going to go to IKEA to buy a couch and get on a public transit? That's just not going to happen.
Yeah, we did have that conversation, didn't we?
Yeah, we did. But we did reach out to IKEA for the business stakeholder discussion as well as the survey to make sure that they were included, because they were part of the master plan discussion when we talked about the business corridor, and they had said emphatically that transit was an issue with keeping, retaining, attracting employees. So we wanted to make sure that we got their feedback. Unfortunately, they did not respond. So we will continue to make sure that we have that open communication. I know that there's been a lot of discussion about having something on Ford Road there, a stop or a fixed route. I don't know where we would put that just yet, but there have been a number of people that we talked to that would be interested in a park and ride situation. So if there was a stop, say at IKEA, because they have a large, expansive parking areas, but people could park there, jump on the rapid transit either to the airport, Detroit, wherever, but their car is somewhere safe, somewhere secure, but they don't have to get there to the stop from their home. There's an in-between.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So maybe we set something up with Assad maybe beforehand and just before the February 13th meeting and give them some input.
We do have the meeting with, when we spoke with Jordan at our December 4th meeting, was that the date? The SMART meeting with HNTB? Yes.
Wasn't it the
18th? Oh, 18th, you're right, I'm sorry. They did state that the draft plan would be available to us sometime this month for communities to comment on it. So, and we did ask very specifically, will there be time to implement any changes or any comments that we do have? And we were told, yes, there will be. So, we can certainly have conversations with Wayne County Executive, but we have that mechanism in place to comment on their draft plan before it's being rolled out to the public.
Okay, great.
Sir?
I
didn't hear anywhere where a shelter or a stop would be addressed, where, you know, like you're out there tonight waiting for the bus, there's nowhere to film. You know, you gotta sell, if you're gonna, think people are gonna vote for this, you're gonna have to sell it. You're gonna have to get that company, and you're gonna have to have those routes defined already. In other words, from here, or let's say the Summit, to Sheets.
Yeah, I think that's what they were saying, that they're shelters. They did see that. That have,
Right, the number one requested infrastructure improvement.
Establishment,
yeah.
Yeah.
that could be a hub. And I've seen it in other communities, and this is the way it's going. You have to be able to count on this stop showing up, and it's gotta be a clean, safe, dry place that's accessible to other routes, because if that, let's say that bus comes from here and it's half loaded, and it's, let's see, well, the Red Wing game's gonna get out tonight at 10:30. So we got a bus going to Detroit. And then we'll have the last one coming back. I mean, there's a lot of thinking that has to be done, and I'm sure with an app and everything else that others have said, it can be done.
Yep.
And with the robo taxi coming out, that could be the shuttle and the main. That you gotta, you know, it can be done with very few vehicles in one community. You just have to have some thinking about that.
Yeah, most likely, it's going to be a combination of services that we look at for the Canton area. So it could be, you know, what we would propose in our plan to then also provide to SMART. Could be a combination of, you know, microtransit areas that, that serve neighborhoods or industrial areas, plus fixed route along the main corridor, something like that. So we are not eliminating any possibilities for the modes of transit, even though obviously the public survey really emphasized that people want to see fixed routes, but most likely it's going to be a combination of different transit modes working together.
Okay, so any other questions here? So any more 3-minute questions from there before we close? Because obviously you guys can ask questions afterwards, but just to wrap up the meeting, do you have a quick one for while the meeting is still on, 3 minutes? Okay, 3 minutes. Yes, yep. That's fine.
So I think one of your biggest challenges is the demographic of the young. Because when you look at when you're young, think back when you were 15, you couldn't wait to get your driver's license. Last thing you want to do is get on a bus. And if you go to the high schools, they drive. And I see all these kids, they want to drive younger and younger and younger and younger. So, and the state keeps lowering the threshold to get a license at, you know, get a permit at 14, get a permit at 15, get a license at 16. How do you market that to somebody who's wants that independence of a car?
Well, I'm fairly familiar with that demographic. I have a 15-year-old son who I can't get to practice his driving. So I've actually had a little bit, just this is my own personal experience, right? I cannot speak statistically for 15-year-olds everywhere, but anecdotally, I'm having a lot of trouble getting him to do the required hours to work towards his second phase of his driver's license.
I see just the opposite. I have a neighbor who's got 14, 15, 16, 17, 4 boys. He's going broke buying cars.
Well, data shows that there actually, young people are driving even less. Yeah.
My man? Thank you.
Thank you.
No, my response to that is I got a 16-year-old, 2 twin granddaughters, and I had to force them to drive my car. They do not want to drive.
They want to be driven.
It's a different generation, I'm telling you. It's totally different. I wanted my license when my father didn't have a car at the time, but I got my license and I got it as soon as I could. My point is, it's a different generation than you think. It's not us. they're different.
I just see the bus burdens a lot of people. They have to get out early, they have to make that bus, they come home late, and without that dependable stop and that dependable transportation, that dependable time, it really burns a lot of their life away. Because, you know, if they got to make the bus, and just think about it, once you're at work and you took the bus, what do you do when an emergency comes up, or you get sick, or something happens, and you get that phone call? What do? You're kind of stuck. And that's,
But that's sort of a product of what we've cultivated in this geographic area. If you go to other big cities, Chicago, New York, Boston, kids are raised depending upon mass transit, depending upon, and when you talk about visitors who come to the city of Detroit or the Detroit area, one of the chief complaints you hear about is the lack of mass transit to get from the airport to downtown Detroit, to get to the hotels and that sort of thing. So I hear what you're saying, but again, I think that's more a product of how we've been raised and brought up in this geographic area.
could be. But I think you're gonna have to really have that laid out in order to sell that,
I
you know,
think what's
not just to have it. Thanks.
I think it's important too, as much as I love a good public transit debate or conversation, is ultimately, we're not here tonight because we're selling a millage to anybody. Wayne County is going to be putting a millage on the ballot.
Yeah.
And what's really cool is that we're ultimately, too, not necessarily responsible for the creation of the plan that would be funded with the millage. We're taking the initiative to create our own plan based on our own ideals and our own values to try to influence the plan that gets developed by other people. They're going to sell that plan, whatever plan they want to sell, and we're going to get dragged along whether we think transit is a great idea or not a great idea. So I think that's important context, right, to think about kind of where we are. And I do think there's a lot of wisdom in how we have approached this, and I'm really grateful that we've done it the way that we have so far by getting the other opt-out communities together, communities who have been very intentional in saying that we did not want to fund transit before, and now we are losing that option. And so we're saying, okay, well, if we are going to be funding transit, now let's get the transit that we think is most relevant to our individual communities. And I remember when the RTA was placed on the ballot in 2016, I believe it passed the township of Canton, and there was only one stop on Michigan Avenue. So more than 50% of Canton's voters voted in favor of a 1.5 mil tax for one bus stop on Michigan Avenue. So I believe the smart millage is 1 mil.
0.994.
Is that rolled back from Hadley, or is it just what it is? So, okay, a little bit less than 1
What it
mil.
currently is.
So it's less than it was in 2016. And we are more than likely going to get a much more robust plan than we would have been offered in 2016. So needless to say, it is likely, I mean, as somebody who runs elections frequently, I would not be shocked if more than 50% of Canton's voters voted in favor of this, including the election results of every one of the current opt-in communities that overwhelmingly vote for this, because it's essentially a renewal for them. So the city of Detroit, along with every opt-in community, already pays this tax. It's going to pass those communities with 75% of the vote. So, you know, it's wise that we got in early, that we started planning this, and that we've been trickling our ideas to SMART to kind of really impact the cake that they're baking. And then obviously we'll have the second bite, too many food and metaphors, but a second option to kind of look at that when it goes out for public comment. So well done, and I'm really glad to see that Canton took a leadership approach when it comes to the opt-out Western Wayne communities on this.
Right. Yeah, very good job in leading the communities. Thank you for doing that. And more to come very, very soon. Any other questions? Obviously, you can continue conversations after the meeting, but any other conversations, comments? Okay, great. This is a study session, so does anyone object to us adjourning it right now?
Wait.
All in favor? Yay, okay. Thank you, everybody.